Hi, I'm Jacob,
And I'm Arianne.
and this is our Code Day Labs project called Roomify. So we started off with the goal of creating a live chat application. And the first thing we needed to do was decide on our roles. So Arianne took the front end of the project, and I decided to do the back end.
So regarding the technologies, here are some of the technologies that we used for the front end. So basically we used Bootstrap, which is a CSS framework to design the website. We also used vanilla JavaScript, HTML, some jQuery, and some Sass as well.
And for the back end, we decided to use Node.js with Express for the server-side routing, and Socket.io for the live features that required real-time updating. And here are some pictures of those technologies.
All right, so regarding the planning and preparing, we basically spent the first week designing the site and also learning new skills that will be applied into this project. So for the planning, initially we designed our prototype using Figma, which is a design tool. We used it to map out the potential pages, elements, components, and graphics. And we also exported some components from the Figma itself to the website.
We also decided to do a room system, which would give us separate rooms for the users to chat in, which would be their own isolated channels. And each room would come with its own name and description when the user creates it. And here's a picture of the Figma, and to the right is our logo. We decided to use GitHub to share our code and communicate our changes. So we created a GitHub repository as the first thing we did.
And this is our README file, which basically summarizes what the project is about.
So we had to learn some new skills in order to start. So I spent the first week examining and practicing Node.js, Express, and Socket.io using official documentation, examples, and online tutorials. And then it was time to actually start creating the project and start coding. So we began by creating the file structure. So we had two main folders, which were the public folder, which would have all our JavaScript, CSS, and HTML files, which would be static. And we had our views folder, which contained all our EJS templates. We also had index.js, which was the main server file, which had all the node.js JavaScript code. So on the back end, the first thing that was done was initializing all the necessary modules and tools that we would need. We started with the routes we would need. So that was a home page, login and register pages, and a chat room page. And so after that was done, the server-side socket.io was also set up so that we could receive messages from the client. I also started creating the passport.js local strategy that we would need, which would allow users to log in and have their own user data, which we kept pretty simple with just a username and a password. So here's an example of some Express routing on the right. So the route is /register, and the request would be a GET request to that register page, and the response would be rendering an EJS file, which would be sent to the user as HTML.
So for the front end, this is what we did. So we wanted the front end code to be accessible in two folders, which are views and public. Basically, the HTML code can be found in the views, while the rest of the CSS and JavaScript files are located in the public folder. So we also used Bootstrap to create the navigation bar and footer. Meanwhile, some of the background are either animated or made gradient through CSS. Lastly, the registration and login forms are made using a mix of Bootstrap and plain CSS. So basically for this one, this is the code for the navigation bar. It's the code structure, and then the Bootstrap is linked on the head of the HTML. This is like the quick preview of the gradient itself, that it changes color. And then for the front end, we were aiming to have a wave-like design that changes color, which you saw on the previous slide. Yeah. So basically you can see that on this part, this is our login page.
So then it was time to link the server-side and client-side code. So we decided to use the EJS templating engine to format our HTML and give it data from the server before giving it to the user. So for the index page, we used that to show the available room and what rooms the users could join when they loaded up that page. And on the login page, we used it to give the user information when they filled out the form incorrectly. We also used socket.io for all the live chat stuff, which would allow for live messages to be broadcast to each user in a room. So here's an example of some of the EJS code. On the server side, you can see it first checks whether any of the fields are empty, whether the username field is empty or the password field is empty. And if they are submitted empty, it renders the EJS page with the variable error set to the string fill all fields. So then on the EJS file, it renders that error code onto the HTML. And here's an example of some of the socket.io code. So when a user sends a message, the client emits a message event, which provides data to the server. And when the server receives that event called message, it saves the message in the database and then emits that message back to everyone in the room. So here's the basic structure of that. You would have the client and multiple clients in the server with a continued connection, whereas with the other requests and responses, it would be not a continued connection.
So these were the additional features that we worked on after the chat application was already functional. So for the front end, we tried to make sure that the gradient background is consistent. And aside from that, we also worked on making the navigation bar and footer interactive using Bootstrap. And we also automized some of the elements on CSS. And then for the buttons and forms, we also checked that it's fully functional.
And on the back end, we added a MongoDB database for storing the users, the rooms, and also the chat messages. We hashed our passwords securely using bcrypt, and we added support for creating and deleting rooms, and also new socket events for when a user joins, leaves, or creates a room. So here's how the hashing would work. So you would take the password and it would be hashed into a string that's sort of like a jumbled mess of characters and numbers. And that string can't be turned back into the original password, but that new hash can be compared to the password. So it only goes one way, and that way, if the database was compromised, those hashes would not be able to be used to log back into those users' accounts. So then once that was done, it was time to deploy the site. So we decided to use Heroku's free hosting service in order to host the site publicly at the URL roomifychat.heroku.com. So here's the general structure in the end. We have the client, which can communicate with the Heroku server in two ways, with regular requests and responses, and with the socket connection. On the server, there's the node.js code, and there's also our HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and EJS files. And the server is also in communication with the MongoDB database in order to store data in a different server. And here's what the final product ended up looking like. This is just a screenshot from the home page. Thanks for watching. The product can be found on GitHub at this URL, and each of our emails can be seen down below.